Dobrý den, спасибо большое на приглашение. Я расскажу о наследии русских сезонов в Испании. Я очень рада быть здесь. Я не очень хорошо говорю по-русски, поэтому я буду говорить по-английски, но спасибо большое. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm going to be talking about Diaghilev's legacy in Spain, and the title is Parting is Such Sweet Sorrow. Diaghilev's Belarus legacy was far-reaching and diverse. After Diaghilev's death, the Belarus diaspora meant that those artists who had worked with Diaghilev traveled and settled in countries where they felt ballet could grow, develop, and flourish. As Leonid Massin admitted, Diaghilev turned the wheel of the history of ballet. And this wheel would continue turning in new choreographic centers that owed its development and success to Diaghilev's influence. However, there was one country where the company stayed for long periods of time and on repeated occasions, where fruitful artistic collaborations developed that would influence Diaghilev's closer associates for years, and where even the king's patronage would make Alfonso XIII describe himself as the company's godfather. That country was Spain, and apparently it became the exception of the norm. This paper will consider why Spain seemed unsuccessful in establishing a national ballet company and a school, or developing choreographic tradition. The main aim is to elicit if Diaghilev's legacy was obscured due to the country's subsequent history, or if Spain was simply unable to comprehend Diaghilev's artistic beliefs. To do this, I will be looking into two different sources of material: the Spanish press reviews of the time and the testimonies of the artists who visited our country with Diaghilev's company. Last but not least, I will try to draw some conclusions that may help understand the singularity of the Spanish case. So first, the press and critics in Spain, los bailes rusos. The arrival of the ballet russe in Spain took place during a Spanish artistic silver age. That was the time when Spanish arts were undergoing important transformations in literature, music, visual arts, and architecture. The arrival of other European artists who sought refuge in Spain during the First World War would reinforce this artistic revival in the country. Indeed, the war had left the ballet russe stranded, and this made Diaghilev accept King Alfonso XIII's invitation to appear in the Teatro Real in 1916. On 17th of May, the company would arrive in Cádiz in order to appear in Madrid in the following week as part of the King's birthday and jubilee celebrations. The press wrote extensively on the event, though most writers were critical of the reader's understanding. Thus, the Madrid Herald announced that few Spanish people will understand the artistic importance of this highly original truth. Matt Losada, who has analyzed in depth the reviews and articles written about this first appearance of the ballet russe in Spain, noted that, despite the critics' efforts to educate Spanish audiences on the importance of the ballet russe, they themselves failed to account for the company's more avant-garde aspects. Diaghilev himself must have known about the low theatrical standards and expectations of the Spanish audiences when choosing his programs, as these presented the ballets that had conquered Paris during their first seasons. None of the radical ballets presented in Paris and London afterwards were brought to Spain. In an interview with Magda Donato in 1917, Diaghilev explained that the Spanish audiences, and I quote, these are Diaghilev's words, have their taste spoiled by the Italian impresarios. They are used to Italian opera, where there is no concern for the work or the ensemble. Diaghilev also compared the Parisian and the Spanish audiences and concluded that the Spanish audiences were obstinate and unable to change their minds about works they had seen. He then described the Spanish press as provincial. When reading the Spanish press reviews appearing during those first seasons, there are some fascinating remarks that keep recurring and that may help us understand how Diaghilev's artistic achievements might have eluded the Spanish critics and audiences. Firstly, and this is something Castillo Palomares in his doctoral thesis also comments upon, is the fact that the ballet russe were called in Spain bailes rusos, that is, Russian dances or Russkie dances. Of course, there are serious implications regarding the disappearance of the term ballet, as it makes the reader aware of the lack of comprehension of what Diaghilev's company meant within the choreographic tradition. A critic who did use the term ballet explained, "It is necessary, as the audience in Madrid does not know about these spectacles, to specify very clearly that these ballets have nothing to do with dances like Excelsior, Sylvia, and such sugary things of bad taste and sad sceneries. The Russian ballet is other thing. It is the paramount of the arts, of the good taste, without bad modernisms. It's another thing that cannot be explained and that it has to be seen." Though imperial dancers had appeared on tours and in galas in other European capitals, the critic seems unaware of the developments of ballet in Russia. Moreover, his self-proclaimed inability to explain what les ballets russes were indicates his, and therefore his possible readers, difficulties to comprehend the profound reforms that Diaghilev's company was presented not just in purely artistic terms, but most importantly in choreographic terms. In the popular imagination, the image that came to mind was that, as presented in Nuevo Mundo, as Russian dances as folk dances. For the Spanish critics of the time, this misconception also translated in their analysis of the works presented, and therefore, when discussing the choreography, most of them refer to it as pantomime or mimic interpretation. For example, when reviewing The Firebird, a critic described it as the perfect union between the music, the scenery, and the mimic interpretation. He then admitted his inability to analyze Stravinsky's music because, and I quote, "we don't have the necessary knowledge." Playwright Cipriano Rivas Cherif went even further and classified the choreographies into three main categories: pantomime, classical dance of the Sylphide type, and modern dance. What he meant by this is that Fokin's works were either pantomimes or classical dances, while Massin's were modern. Fokin's reforms and manifestos had appeared both in Russia and London prior to the company's visit to Spain. However, it seems as if no news of their existence had reached the Spanish press and artistic milieu. Moreover, one cannot help wondering what Fokin would have thought of his new ballet being described as pantomimes or classical ballets. The ballet was returned to Spain on many occasions, and they made similar reviews whenever they came. Of special interest is the tour around Spain in 1918. The tour showed the company the reality of a country that Tamara Karsavina would describe in later years as a small country and, after all, not very rich. So, second part, the artist's testimonies, parting is such sweet sorrow. If the audience and critics did not fully comprehend the artistic values the ballet russe represented, the artists associated to Diaghilev knew the artistic possibilities Spain could offer them at the time. Lydia Sokolova wrote the most thorough accounts of the ballet russe visits to Spain, and it is through her that we get to know vivid descriptions of the country that welcomes Diaghilev's troupe. I was amazed to find Madrid so small. There wasn't even a hairdresser's shop. We all loved Spain, however. The love for Spain was shared by Diaghilev himself, as Grigoriev, the company's regisseur, also recalls. Diaghilev was in ecstasy at the beauty of Spain, and Las Meninas was the first result of his enthusiasm. Las Meninas would not attract much enthusiasm from the audience, but it had an important supporter, Alfonso XIII, who from the company's first performance in Madrid had become their warmest benefactor. Wojciechowski, Sokolov, and Grigoriev speak of the king's affection for the company, something that proved invaluable when releasing Václav Nijinsky, and you have a photograph of the telegram that announces his release from Poland because of the king's intervention, bringing him to America and Spain in 1917, and also in granting permission for the company to travel to London in 1918. King Alfonso never missed a performance, according to Grigoriev, and it was at his request that the only performances of Parade were given in Madrid in 1917. Diaghilev had not included it in his Spanish tour, as he considered it, and I quote Grigoriev, too advanced, and, sure enough, the public did not care for it. The king, on the other hand, was delighted with it. The 1918 tour showed the harsh reality of Spain. Sokolova recalls vividly the contrasts between the cathedrals hidden in narrow streets containing Madonnas with pearls for eyes, crowned and hung with precious stones, while they saw the blind and crippled beggars sitting on the steps outside. She also described the regional theaters where they had to perform as the worst in Europe. Massin also commented on the hotels that were usually unheated and forced us to sleep fully dressed, even with our overcoats and hats. It was during this tour that the company started learning the different Spanish dances that would appear later in Le Tricorn. As Grigoriev explained, Diaghilev indeed made it a point that the whole company should watch and assimilate the Spanish dances. Le Tricorn soon started taking shape as a collaboration between Manuel de Falla, the Martinez Sierras, and Pablo Picasso. As Sokolova recalls, the company used to go to the cafes at night to watch the local dancers, and no one watched these dancers more keenly than Leonid Massin. For while he had been away, he and Diaghilev had searched in many towns for a Spanish dancer around whom a ballet could be made. There is plenty of research about Le Tricorn, and it is not the purpose of this paper to extend on it. However, as the only surviving ballet of the 3 Spanish works created by Diaghilev in Spain, it is worth mentioning the great involvement of Spanish dancers, especially Felix Fernandez. As Massin would recognize years later, I worked with him a long time, and little by little I mastered, since I had a fairly good ear, the flamenco rhythm. That, of course, was the groundwork for Le Tricorn. It is full of zapateado. It is also a well-known fact that the original idea of having this work performed by Spanish dancers in the lead roles would not be fulfilled. Massin and Tamara Karsavina now danced the main roles, rehearsals took place in London, and so did the premiere of the work. By the end of 1918, and again through the help of King Alfonso XIII, the company obtained permission to travel to London. Though the company had loved Spain and its people, the news of finally leaving the country made Sergei Diaghilev cry out of joy. The lack of prospect for the company in Spain had made the situation impossible to endure. As Sokolova recalled, by leaving Spain and going to London, the Diaghilev ballet was to survive. The company would return to the country on several occasions, and in 1921 there would be a last collaboration, Cuadro Flamenco. Though the dancers this time would be Spanish, the ballet would not be seen in Spain. Conclusions. The question of Diaghilev's legacy in Spain remains unclear and depends on what we understand by that term. By analyzing the reviews appearing when the company visited Spain and comparing these to those of other European capitals like London, it seems obvious that the Spanish critics and intellectuals writing about Le Ballet Russe were unable to comprehend its significance, not only because modern art had not been part of the Spanish landscape. Let's not forget all the Spanish artists were working and living in Paris. But also because there had been no traditions with regards to dance and especially ballet, which explain why they could not even name it or describe it in their reviews. Although Castillo Palomares rightly argues that it was during the war years that Diaghilev planned and conceived many of the ideas that would materialize in new groundbreaking works for the company, it is also true that, starting with Parade, these works were seldom seen in Spain. Therefore, it seems as if the country provided a wonderful background for ideas and aesthetics that would not root in its soil. Regarding King Alfonso XIII, his role as the company's godfather remains to be further researched. As it seems intriguing that loving ballet as much as he seems to have loved it, it would never occur to him to foster or initiate a Spanish dance school or national company. Considering the amount of time Diaghilev's artists were stranded and jobless in Spain, it would have seemed natural to ask them for advice in order to plan and develop a choreographic tradition in Spain. Perhaps the king thought that his countrymen and women were unable to work together to establish such tradition. Indeed, there were many critics, and I'm going to quote Joaquin Fraser, who asked their readers to reflect on the perfect organizations the Russians had, and we did not. He said, let's reflect on this, and let's leave it there. Without expecting pears from an elm tree, nor aspire for the elm tree to abdicate on the pear tree, as this would be too beautiful. By 1921, there were critics and intellectuals who were wondering why there were no efforts at creating a national dance company and school. Julio Gomez, writing for El Liberal, concluded that, again, it had to do with our individualism. Spanish female dancers are admirable, but the dance companies are horrid. Though Antonia Mercé in La Argentina would start a company following Diaghilev's formula and artistic collaboration, the Ballet Español in 1929, the company would never perform in Spain. And therefore its legacy, as Idoia Murga Castro will explain next, was not felt in the country. It is true that the Ballet Russe left their mark on the Spanish scene, and it rose its artistic standards, especially when it came to stagings and theatrical stagings. However, the mark on the choreographic art was minimal. To conclude, I point to an important aspect of Diaghilev's legacy, that is the diaspora of artists, who once Diaghilev died, went to live and work in those countries where they had visited and where they felt they could implement and develop the artistic ideas they had learned from this great man. Only one, Valentina Kashiwa, came to Spain because she married a Spanish man. Apart from that, not one of the close artists associated to Diaghilev chose Spain. They had all loved it, but they must have known that there were few possibilities to implement a choreographic tradition in the country. As Drummond explains, peripatetic companies without a proper base were always vulnerable to changing attitudes, soaring costs, and social upheaval. The future in creative terms was to live with those Diaghilev survivors who settled in one place, however improbable, founded a school, established a company, and developed a repertoire. In 1929, Francisco Miralles, a Spanish dancer who had worked and taught in Russia and was then a teacher in Paris, told Anais Nin, Russia had schools and the Russians worked together in their arts. In Spain, there is no school, no interest, no unity. We have now two national companies, but we still have no school, no theatre, and very little established repertoire. It seems as if the presence of the Ballet Russe left very little in Spain. As Lydia Lopokova concluded, we took much more from Spain than what we left. This may explain why, when attempts were made during the Second Republic to create a national school and company, the lack of references and models doomed the enterprises. The rest is history. Franco's coup d'etat would put an end to Spain's artistic silver age. Thank you very much.